Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode. Today, our climate change coordinator, Autumn, will be speaking with Abby from the Ecology Action Center based in Nova Scotia about her experiences with wildfires, as she's experienced two in her lifetime, one in Australia and one in Halifax.
Hi, Abby. Do you want to tell us a bit about yourself first, maybe, and then we could jump into more about your experiences with the wildfires in Australia and if you had any experience during Nova Scotia as well.
Yeah, happy to. Hi, my name's Abby. I am a community engagement officer at the Ecology Action Center. I'm currently engaged with grid electrification, vehicle electrification, and the electric school bus campaign in the province of Nova Scotia. That's where I'm based out of. I'm based out of Mi'kma'ki. I try not to reveal too much about what I'm talking about. I'm trying to think of other things that I do. Outside of work, I'm an avid hiker and enjoy getting outdoors, which is why I'm super excited to be able to talk about this topic on your podcast because I feel like it's really relevant, especially for the people that go outdoors to try and mitigate their stress with climate change and then get affected by things. So I'm just excited to be here and talk about my experience.
Nice, thank you. Yeah, awesome opening, and I'm really excited to kind of learn more about your experience in Australia and what that was like, during the wildfire season, and also experience one of the deadliest, or I guess not deadliest, but one of the most intense wildfires during your time there. So, do you want to dive into that? Maybe like share a bit of what was that feeling like being.
Well, I used to start by saying that when I first went to Australia, I was 18 and I was living in Melbourne at the time in the state of Victoria. And I'd made some friends and they were going to take me out of the city. They were locals. So we were driving out of the city. And once you get about 2 hours into the drive, keeping in mind I'm from Nova Scotia, we don't really have forest fires here. We haven't had them in hundreds of years. So I'm not really familiar with anything related to that. We started getting up to these rusty car carcasses along the side of the road. And I remember the vibes in the car kind of shift a little bit. Like music was playing, no one was really talking. They all kind of went silent when they saw them. And I remember being like, whoa, like what happened? Like where did we all go here? And no one really wanted to give me an answer. So I ended up, as you do, doing some Googling when I got home that night to find out that they were likely from one of the deadliest forest fires Australia had ever had. It was called Ash Wednesday, and apparently many people lost their lives, and a lot of the cars were just sort of left there. Anyway, as I got to know these locals better, they did share that it's sort of like a scary reminder for them that although summer is fantastic, you have to be really careful when you're in Australia going out of the cities because you just never know. So yeah, I remember just putting them in the back of my mind and being like, I'll be respectful of that, and I'm glad I'm here. I'll keep safe, etc. Came home, thought nothing of it. Went back to Australia in December of 2020, and suddenly it's 4 in the morning. My partner at the time's mother had been spam calling us because there was a fire alert where we were staying. So we got in the car. I had my passport and my phone, and that was all I had on me because I was so tired and just so out of nowhere. And we drove. We drove the 4 hours out to where the family was. And I remember the sun was rising and the sun was hitting these cars, the old car carcasses, as we were driving up to them because it was about 5 a.m. at this point. And I remember being like, wow, at the time when I heard that story and found out about these cars, I never thought I would be here, and now here I am in this situation where I am running for the safety of my own life and seeing these cars. So yeah, very scary times. I was luckily able to kind of bury that, came home, and I was like, you know what, I'm safety of Nova Scotia. Nothing happens here. It's all good. And then last summer, well, I was actually hiking with no cell reception. And got back to the car, started driving out of the trailhead, and had like 18 missed calls from my mom. And I told her I was hiking, and she didn't know we were going. I think I was talking to her that morning on the phone. She was asking me what I was up to during the weekend. And I said, "Oh, we're gonna go do a hike this weekend." And nah, nah, nah. Anyway, so I called her and I was like, "My grandfather's died. Like something awful is going on." And she was like, "Where are you? Like, where are you hiking?" And I was like, "Oh, like nah, nah, nah." Luckily, we weren't anywhere near it, but as we started getting close to Halifax, you could just see the smog. And I remember I just like this panic that came over me of, oh my God, like this is in my backyard now. So I really had a rough go for those like 2 weeks. My grandparents were kind of near the area. I had a friend who lost a house. I had a friend that was a first responder to that call. I had quite a few friends impacted and didn't get to go back to their homes for quite a while. And when they did go back, had to deal with smoke damage and all the long impacts of that. So yeah, it was an interesting summer for sure because you just never I never anticipated having to feel that again. And I've found that ever since then now when forest fires come up, when wildfires come up, I just get this like eerie feeling and this worry that overcomes me to the point that I was in British Columbia a couple of weeks ago, and I saw a chopper go by, and I like out of panic looked up, being like, "Please don't be holding a water jug! Please don't be holding a water jug!" And it was carrying one of those big things of water. And I remember I spent the next 20 minutes online just making sure that I was nowhere near them because I was just paranoid. Like it's I don't know, it's a heavy feeling to carry, being worried that you're going to be there again in the car, driving by the car carcasses again. So yeah,
Right.
that is my story with kind of both actually of the fires, my experience in Australia and Nova Scotia. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any follow-up questions on either.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah, because that is such a intense feeling that you would have had, like going for me personally, like, driving out and seeing those car carcasses and just being like in my mind, like, oh, that could be us at any moment in that sense, you know what I mean? Like that would have been so overwhelming and very, very like scary. And so like, you touched on this a little bit with the impact of, your friend's house from Nova Scotia and how would have to go back and deal with that long-term impact. So I guess how do you think that community members, what do they do in that time of crisis, like after the fact when there's no more resources coming in, they have to go now deal with the aftermath.
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like just to touch on Nova Scotia, as it's a little bit more fresh in my mind, what I found was really beautiful in all of the disaster was how much Nova Scotia kind of came together. There was two group chats that sort of started on Facebook that I added myself into both. One was because a lot of people. It was actually one of the biggest high schools in one of the bigger high schools in Halifax, CP Allen, had their prom that day, and their area of the school district was where the forest fire was. So many families were in Halifax at the public gardens getting their prom photos done when the fire alerts went out and they couldn't go home to get their stuff or their family pets. So there was actually this dedicated group chat where people that were near those places were going to homes and rescuing animals. Fire search and rescue could go and find. There's also a barn that's off of Hammond's Plains. It's on the street of Pockwalk, and that's where the forest fires sort of trailed off, and they had to release the horses at one point from the barn just because they didn't have any way of getting them out. So they just let them go, hoping that they could run for their own lives. So this group chat was also being used to help locate the horses. And I don't know, I think I cried a lot when I was in there, and people were like, "Have you found my dog?" And there were a couple that they didn't find, but it was also really relieving to see how much everyone came together to try and find them. And people that weren't in evacuated areas were like, "We're keeping our eyes out." A couple of them had found some animals. So that was really beautiful. And then there was also another group chat that started, and it was for like people that could donate resources to families. And quite a few community centers opened up and were like, "We're taking donations and resources." And any families that got evacuated could go there to get clothes and food and stuff like that. Because a lot of them were either like forced to stay with friends and family or had nowhere to go, were forced to stay in hotels. I know my partner's father gave up his home and moved in with a friend of his and had a family staying at his home for a while because they had nowhere else to go. So yeah, I think that was really eye opening that Nova Scotian communities really came together. I'm not too sure if that was the same in Yarmouth because we also had the really like I think the forest fires were even worse in Yarmouth than they were in Nova Scotia. But from what I heard, it was mostly not near the main city center. So I hope that anyone that was impacted by those was able to get some resources as well. But
Wow,
yeah,
yeah. I'm glad that at least that the community came together because it's almost like when there is a crisis, the community does seem to kind of work together because they need to solve this, and it really just shows that people are connected to each other. It's just we got to break down those silos, and once we do, then we can work together to solve such a huge crisis. And I wish that sometimes it was focused on something else than just silliness. Yeah.
yeah.
So would now that you've kind of gone through sort of Australia's wildfire and also like Nova Scotia as well in a way, how has this experience kind of changed your perspective on natural disasters? I know you touched on this a little bit, but um, I guess for me, it's just we're both in that world of the environment and wanting to protect it as much as we can, but having real life, real time experience with a natural disaster, especially with something that can be so devastating and destructive as wildfires, do you want to expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, great question. I sometimes think that Australia 2020 really actually reshaped my focus. I was on track to do a degree in social work prior to December 2020. And I had come home, started my undergrad, and did a couple courses from like the environmental science, sustainability side at Dow, and had enjoyed them, but was still like, you know what, I'm here. I might as well just finish what I've started. And then I was actually the midway through my second year. So shortly after I came home from during COVID, shortly after I came home from Australia, that I was like, now I'm going to do environmental science and like switched my degree over. So part of me thinks that it actually had a play in getting me where I am, because I sort of was like, we need to be working so that this doesn't happen to people. Like no one should have to go through that. And that's like the reality that they face in Australia, as I'm sure it is in British Columbia, as I'm sure it will now be for people who just experienced those fires in Jasper. So I didn't want it to be my reality at home. And I was like, maybe this is what I'm meant to do, is put my life into working towards not making it a reality. Like, what can we do to change this now? So I think it would change my perspective in that way. I think it really has honed into the importance of, as we think about the environmental moment, we also think about prioritizing adaptation and taking care of people and taking care of like what we're going to do in the face of these challenges, because they probably will likely only get worse. So making sure that we start building up our resources now, like taking time when forest fire season is low to be like, okay, how are we going to best equip communities that are in foresty areas to be able to have resources should this happen, like having backup plans. I listened to a podcast of a lady that was out back hiking in Jasper when the forest fires hit. See, when this happens to you, you just sort of keep your ear on things, unfortunately, just because I don't know, maybe you want to relive your pain in some way. I don't. I don't know why I do it to myself. I just get sad for no reason. But she had mentioned that they were telling her that they were just so underprepared, like they never anticipated something like this happening. And I just sort of felt like maybe this should be something that Canada as a whole looks at, making sure that there's a plan for every single province, every single territory, so that if something like this does happen, we have a plan in motion. Like, okay, here's our forest fire plan. Like, it just sounds like something that we need to look to as we build into a climate impacted Canada, you know? So I don't
Yeah,
know.
exactly. Like building a more resilient, prepared Canada in the face of climate change coming and really shifting everything that we once knew about our world into something else. And I guess, do you have any advice on someone who might experience a wildfire in in the future, in the sense of, that the woman that was out backpacking in Jasper, she had no idea that would happen. But do you have any advice, I guess, for those people that are may encounter one?
Yeah, no, definitely. Um, I think it sounds silly, but the best advice is to not let it impact you. You know, you always see those people that were like attacked by sharks and then they become the best advocates for sharks. And they're the ones that are like, no, we should save them. Like, it's not their fault this happened to me. I feel like um, in some ways it made me feel even more connected. And I really picked up, you and I talk about this all the time about our hiking adventures. I feel like I really picked up my hiking adventure because I was like, you know what, getting outside and seeing how pretty things are and how much I want to protect it is really what helped me, I think, process some of those emotions. I think it's also okay to have those emotions. The people at work always say that having eco anxiety sucks, but in some way it also makes you feel like you're alive, like you're aware of what's going on around you, you're acknowledging that, and how do you work towards that? I also think it's good to just keep an eye on what's going on. I know, like DAL and I know EAC, we do put on workshops and stuff like that for people, climate talks, tea talks, stuff like that. People can come and just talk about their experiences. It's important to open up if you're not comfortable in a group, maybe with someone that you know. And then I don't know, keep in mind for the future. So when I go hiking out in no reception areas, I have a Garmin on me. So that way, if for some reason I got in trouble, I can send an SOS signal, you know, and just making sure that although it sucks to have to think about those things, you are thinking about those things, maybe encouraging others to do so as well. I know everyone in Nova Scotia, at least in the Hammonds Plains area that I've spoken with, was able to take advantage of insurance plans and were able to get their homes fixed, which is super important. So maybe just being educated on those things, making sure that whatever insurance you get for your home covers natural disasters to some extent. So that way, you're protected in like worst case scenarios. Being prepared, keeping an eye on the news. I am now subscribed to this. There's this guy in Nova Scotia. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's like a retired firefighter, and he does all like these announcements on like not Twitter. What's it called now? X, of
Yeah.
like all the stuff that the fire department does, and everyone sort of picked up on him during the forest fire because we were all keeping up on him. And every once in a while, if it's been like a bit of a dry spill, I'll go take an eye and see if he's reported anything. Like it's just good to be aware, so that you can support where you can. And if there is a forest fire going on, I don't know, check out what's going on at your local community center. Can you donate stuff? Can you drop anything off? Even if it's just your time, if you don't have the means to donate resources, maybe you have the time to donate your hands to go help clean up rubble or locate pets.
Is there any hope, I guess, despite like the possibility of increasing frequency intensity of forest fires? Like, do you see any hope for us in the future?
I think you have to see hope, or else I think you're just gonna be really down bad. I think that I see hope in the sense that we're becoming more and more aware of things. Like we talk about that a lot in our sector about how like 10 years ago, like my job wouldn't have been a thing, and now we're more aware of what's going on. So we're working towards better, and if not better, working towards how do we live with this and how do we make our lives not as difficult while living through this. We talked about that adaptation. So I think there's hope in knowing that like people are more aware of what's going on, working towards a better, more resilient future for us, ourselves included. I find people can be annoying, but also super helpful, especially when you are looking to support or needing support or wanting to be involved in something. Or wanting to feel like you're giving back in some way, which I think in some ways makes our work, I'm sure you can agree, feel really meaningful when you feel like you are doing something to support your community and give back to your community. And then you know that in turn, maybe they'll support you if ever you need something, maybe during a crisis.
Exactly. Oh no, for sure, because wildfire disasters, it can be an intense and overwhelming feeling because it's to not only is it the wildfire itself, but it's also the air pollution that comes along with it and how that can affect like different regions of like the world essentially. And so to me, that is also like another lens onto it. But I agree with you in the sense of like having hope, because if you don't have hope, why? Like having hope is the reason that you get up in the morning because you're hopeful that it's going to be a good day. Having hope means that you can see a future where the wildfires are minimal, or we're using prescribed or cultural burns. Like those are the reasons that we have hope within, I think, our field at least, because if we didn't, why would we be trying so hard? There was one quote that one of my colleagues has said, and I've always for some reason it's just always stuck with me. It was a sense of um, environmentalists, they don't necessarily win the war, they win the battle. Every year is a battle in the sense of, we had said we want this land protected, and we ensure that it's going to be culturally burned and or prescribed burned, and so that way we can ensure that it doesn't have any massive forest fires. But the next year we don't know. So I really enjoy thinking about that because it's true, and sometimes having hope and knowing that there are supporters. And I think it's increasing too, the sense of wanting to save the earth. But yeah,
Mhm.
I just want to say thank you for coming out here today and talking to us about your experience with wildfires. I really do appreciate that. And if you have anything else that you would like to add before we hop off, like please let me know.
In Australia, they do this burn off practice, that they learned from the indigenous communities there that used to do this thousands of years ago to help mitigate forest fire spreading, where they burn the root of the tree up and it doesn't kill the tree. It just helps stop the spread of the fire.
Mhm.
And I feel like we don't do enough of going back and looking at the history and talking to people and getting the story of like what they used to do or how they have, because they know the land better than we do. So when and where we can, I think we need to make sure that we prioritize involving Indigenous Mi'kmaq communities across the province, across all of the Atlantic and Canadian regions, to make sure that they have a say and they can advise us on what to do. Where in a lot of cases, I know from work, we always say they know the land so much better, and they do. So
They
yeah, I
really
think
know.
that's my concluding point, closing point.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Abby. I really appreciate you taking your time to do like sharing your experience with us. I know that would have put you in a vulnerable state and also maybe take you back there, but I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today about it.